네, 세계 각국에서 그리고 국내에서
From around the world and on site, there are many participants joining us online. I would like to thank you for being here. And my name is Ji Eun-cha, moderator of the session. From now on, we'll begin the session on historical reconciliation and sustainable relations of peace in Northeast Asia. Before I begin, I would like to invite the chairperson Lee up from the NAHF for welcoming remarks. Please welcome him with a big hand. Good afternoon. My name is Young-ho Lee, chairperson of NAHF. In the midst of COVID-19 crisis, I am glad to be at the presence of the Jeju Forum. I would like to welcome all of you to the forum. The session is held on the 25th of June, which is very meaningful, and I think it is timely to talk about permanent peace and prosperity in Asia, and it is all the more meaningful for us to host the session today. As you're well aware, around the world, in the rivalry of the strategies between the US and China, I think the international environment are changing dynamically, and also conflict over history is getting intensified and is becoming more frequent. In the midst of all the difficulties, NAHF is trying to find a way for the three countries in this region to build a friendship. That's why we chose the topic on how to write an inclusive history towards the future in the region. In this region, rather than the cooperation for peace and coexistence, there were more wounds and also difficulties and harms. And without reflecting ourselves on the past, it will be very difficult for us to maintain permanent peace in the region. Without any gesture toward reconciliation in the history, we will not be able to maintain what we enjoy in the region, especially among the three countries. We do not have a sharing common sense in terms of history, which are the preconditions for peace. So I think we need to find a common ground in understanding the same history. So today's session is held to nurture creativity among the three countries for reconciliation in history. Presenter Myung-gyu Park, Hyuk Lee, Mie Chung, and we have a speaker joining us online from Japan, who Shao Hua Ma. I would like to thank you all for being here with us. Not only that, we also have a discussant named Asano Toyomi, who are also joining us online. And also, I would like to thank Hyun-suk Kim for discussion. And also, I would like to thank Hyun-chul Kim for taking a role as a chairperson. My expectation is high for all of you. Thank you so much. Thank you, chairperson, for welcoming remarks. Once again, please give him a big hand. I think it is the right time for us to start the session. Now, please allow me to introduce the moderator of the session, Hyun-chul Kim. Hyun-chul Kim is a senior researcher at the NAHF and also Institute for Korea-Japan Historical Issues. I would like to turn my microphone to you. Good afternoon. My name is Hyun-chul Kim, Senior Research Fellow. We are holding the session on the historical reconciliation and sustainable relations of peace in Northeast Asia. It is my pleasure to be a moderator. If we were not hit by the COVID-19, I think we would have been able to welcome the speakers from Japan, but I would like to ask for your kind understanding for them to join online. I better introduce to you presenters from my left-hand side. I have Myung-Gyu Park, professor. He taught at the Seoul National University for sociology, and also he is working as an endowed professor at GIST. And not only that, he was the president of the Korean Social History Association, and also he is researching about social history, sociology of the nation, and national identity. And we have Professor Hyuk Lee. Now, he is teaching at Sungkyunkwan University, and also he is the head of the Chinese Study Institute. He is interested in the three countries' relations, and also he is exchanging his knowledge with many universities in China. And we have Dr. Zhang. She studied in Japan, and also she is interested in her major is in civic society in Japan. And not only that, she was a consular at the embassy, and also she is a visiting scholar at the research institute. We have a Dr. Kim. Her major is a history of Goguryeo, and also she's currently a senior researcher at the Northeast Asian History Foundation. Previously served as the head of the Korea-China Relations Institute, and also she's conducting a research on the King Gwanggaeto's monument. And there are two distinguished guests who are joining us online. And the first presenter from Japan is Ma Xiaoa, professor at the Osaka University. Can you see us well? For your reference, okay. Later on, I will introduce to you. And discussant from Japan is Asano Toyomi, professor from the Waseda University. Can you hear us well? Professor Toyomi.
네, 반갑습니다.
Nice to meet you. Sorry for our technical issues. Professor Asano received a PhD in Tokyo University, and also he worked at the Research Institute in the US and Japan. Also, he conducted many research on the relations between the Korea and Japan. Also, he helped us a lot to organize the session today. So now we better attend the presentation by each presenter, and we are given 80 minutes. So wish we were given more time, but due to time constraint, I would like to give each presenter 8 minutes. And then you will have the floor when we have discussion. Please, Myung-Gyu Park, start your presentation.
Good afternoon. I am Professor Popyeong Gyu. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to present my opinion. My time is reduced from 10 to 8 minutes. I have to be even quicker. I will just point my core points. What I try to say today is divided into the 5 keywords that I represent to you on the slides. These are something that you can understand as very easily, but I will touch upon one by one. I believe you have heard of Asia paradox, and Northeast Asia is the place where Northeast Asia paradox exists. That is, the mutual dependency and mutual distrust is commonly existing. We are expanding our trade, our exchange in culture, society, and social area, but have intensified confrontation with the psychological distrust. Due to this fact, people have mixed reaction to the situation. Some say the Northeast Asia would be the leading power to lead the future of the world, and some others said this is the most unstable place among the world areas. However, this kind of two different sides can be explained by this condition, that is nationalism. The nationalism in the Northeast Asia, as it is in other areas, was the motive for the modernization and the transition to the modernization. It is something that we put everything in the furnace. The independent sovereignty nation, that willingness is also in the furnace, and our intrinsic language, culture, and the identity should be there. That is also in the furnace, and also our development way of thinking to push forward the economic growth. All were tied into nationalism, which made Northeast Asia as dynamic as it is and as developed as it is. However, there also are dark sides that brings about from the nationalism. We are somewhat self-centered and somewhat ethnic based way of thinking is central at the central area, and we have conflicting interests due to this nationalism. However, this has been the motive for the dynamic of this area, but as our chairperson already mentioned, for us to understand this area due to the nationalism, we have lack of understanding of how we can mingle together in this region together. So in the first part of the 20th century, we also have the negative legacy there that brings about the lack of the regionalism. So after finishing the 20th century and to go to the 21st century, the Northeast Asia's nationalism has met the turn of change. There were lots of background behind that. It's because of the end of the Cold War and into post-Cold War era, and there emerged expansion of the new type of cooperation. Then we saw the possibility to go beyond the limitation that caused by the nationalism. There have been some cases where we made lots of effort to go beyond the nationalism. Although we have time delays among those cases, but some came to being quite at the same time. So in the book and in the articles, people express their idea, and the citizens, NGOs, and the companies, those non-governmental entities, try to talk about something different from the nationalism. And also the feminism and the theory of the feminism have more influence. So the nationalism and the family-oriented way of thinking is something that is put on the back burner. People think about their own idea and the importance of the regionalism first to reflect upon themselves when it comes to the nationalism. And this was something that happened both in Japan, China, and Korea. So when we have the trilateral summit or meetings, we had small changes. That is, we in the tourist attractions have explanation about that tourist spot, both in Korean, Japanese, and Chinese. It is small, but it's a big progress. And based on that, maybe we were able to have some clues to solve the history-related issues. So there were the opportunities for upgrade from the nationalism. There were times for that. But the issue there, when we fast forward to today and looking back in the past, this kind of change of the flow is being delayed or it is go backward. So current situation is so concerning, in that manner. The paradox is here still, and it is intensified. And the multilateral related activities and the work are being weakened and not protecting the way and the effort that we made so far. It's partly because of the COVID-19, but COVID-19 is not fully blamed for this situation. The, the, the US, it is centered on the protectionism and self-centered to think about their own interests first. And Korea also have same kind of trends as well. Based on the situation, it reminds me of what Zygmunt Bauman said. That is about the retrotopia, return to the past. When the humanity loses its hope for the future, it tries to go back to the past to rely on that and just avert from the negative prospect for the future. That could be something that we have to keep in mind when we are thinking of our future. Maybe it is too pessimistic to present, but without the common understanding the vision for the Northeast Asia, then not inclusiveness, but hatred will be something that encapsulate us. That we will go to backward. That we will have Northeast Asia type of retrotopia. So what I'm thinking here, the restructuring and upgrade and new imagination. For that, we have to have transition in paradigm when we write our history. I feel the sense of the necessity for that once again. And rather than just keeping ourselves within our boundary, within our own way of thinking, we have to penetrate throughout the borders to think about the region as a whole and also include the generations, different generations, and also the minorities and others so that we have better understanding and the viewpoint to explain the history. And we also have to think about the sustainability and biological factors and also the climate change. Those should be something that we have to go forward rather than just keeping ourselves with the Asian paradox. Then we can have the intellectual motive to go forward. That's what I'm thinking. And thank you for your listening.
네,
Thank you, Professor Park, for your presentation. His presentation material was very long, but I think he kept his presentation very concise. So as a framework said, he touched upon the meaning of the nationalism and also changing environment in the region. And also he mentioned that there needs to be paradigm shift in historical narrative. And the next speaker is Hyuk Lee. My name is Hyuk Lee. Just to introduce, topic of my presentation is strategic competition between the U.S., China, and Korea-China relations and lessons from history. COVID-19 hit us, and we need to think about whether, because of COVID, the U.S.-China relations are changed or vice versa. I think it gives us different direction for us to interpret the current situation. I believe that the U.S. and China relations are changing, and COVID-19 came through. So I think COVID-19 is not an independent parameter, but changing relations between the two countries is already a parameter itself. So I think the focus of the change in relations is that the U.S. Doesn't want China to be at the center of the global community. And back then, when the Kissinger was the head of the state, said that if China is not stable, then we cannot secure the security of the world. So after that, China achieved dramatic economic development, and as there was a trade war between the two countries back in 2018, then the topic of the 1971 re-emerged again. Without stability over China, there's no stability in the world, meaning that we should abandon a comprehensive approach. Rather, we need to take on competitive approach. So we are calling this a changing environment as a dismantling over Kissinger order. So the two countries are pursuing strategic competition, and under the Biden administration is taking a different path in terms of foreign policy to the Trump administration. But there are still some parts that the Biden administration succeeded, the idea of Trump administration. So in terms of the diplomatic manner, the Biden administration is very stylish. But still, there are a lot more similarities between the two administrations for China policy. I think in that sense, China has not been taking conflicting posture against the US because China has been very pragmatic, and China thinks it is not possible for them to take such a posture. So I think there are limitations for the two countries to take complete decoupling. That's not wanted by the US nor by China. And at the focus of the China vaccine is also focused on gaining upper hand for the US and trying to rewrite the global order. The US is trying to anchor China at the bottom and still pursuing the dream for the US to be a global leader. And the same can be said of China. When China also recognizes their limitations, when they take posture from strong to strong, China, I think, recognizes that it needs to prepare itself for the future. So China is being very cautious and prudent, and depend on the national power to accommodate China itself to the model of the US. They don't want it. So I believe that this whole changing environment is re-changing environment for the two relations. And also there's a competition between semiconductors. It depends on which country gains upper hand. The global landscape can completely be different. So for China, especially about the data platform, they put lots of policy effort on it. So I think rather than we put the relations between the two countries into the frame of Cold War, I think we need to take a different perspective. They don't want to take the risks to go back to the Cold War era. I think it is more like a cool war, so cold. That's the current trend and current situation between the two countries. So I think that's one of the ways to perceive the structure between the two countries. And that changing situation between the two countries forced Korea to choose very strategic decision. I think now it boils down to a matter of value and also sovereignty. And China continuously say that the US is being overpowering, especially when they intervene with domestic policy. So maybe we need to draw a fine line between the boundary between the value and sovereignty. And we have to think about how we can how we can cooperate with other countries. And also we need to be very careful and cautious in applying foreign policies. Although the Asia Pacific and also the US is standing full gear for the Indo-Pacific policies, and they try to put pressure on China, and China tried to make a breakthrough moment in this sense. In response to that, I think Korea needs to be open and transparent, and we need to go toward a path of expanded balance. As Korea respects the value of equality, and Korea also may need to participate in One Belt, One Road policy of China, and also needs to have the multifaceted policies, and also about the military alliance system with the US. Korea needs to be very careful, and the same can be said of the military asset issue. We are in a situation of the area where we need to really well manage our military, a potential war situation. So we do have a identity of a single state. We should think about geopolitics and also geographical. It's very complicated. So I think how the US perceives China, how Korea perceives China are very different. So in terms of foreign policy, there are much pressure placed on Korea. And also we can witness the dismantling of a Francisco system and also the armistice system on the Korean peninsula. San Francisco system is based on anti-communism, and also that started from the weak civil society. What I am witnessing is the dismantling of our Francisco system, and it means a strong society and strong civil society are working together. There are so many issues related to that, and those issues come into play into the politics, so we cannot overlook the fact that such issues do not exist. So Francisco system and armistice systems are dismantling, and in the process, we need to think about how we can build relationships with China as well as the US. We need to reflect ourselves on that. And the rest of my presentation, I would like to lay out to you in the discussion session. Thank you, Professor Lee, for your remarks. In Northeast Asia, there's a conflicting factor between the US and also China, and how their relations would affect the history of Korea. I think he will explain to us well about that. And in his paper, there are more details. So please refer to his paper to better understand about his ideas and thoughts. And the next speaker is Dr. Chung.
네, 안녕하세요.
Good afternoon. I am Jung Mi-ae. I'd like to express my deepest gratitude for giving me this opportunity to do the presentation here in Jeju Forum. Until last year, November, I have been a consul general in the Nagasaki Prefecture. I think my presentation opportunity is due to my stay in Japan. So based on my experience, I will do my presentation. The Korea-Japan relation is being worsened and being intensified. And today, our focus is the reconciliation and sustainable relation for peace. So for that remarks, I'd like to, based on my experience, I want to talk about the possibility of reconciliation. So the Nigata Council is the recent one to be established among the councils in Japan. Toyama Prefecture and Niigata Prefecture and Matsushita And Matsushita is located in Niigata, and Yunbongil Matar Monument is located in Nishika Prefecture. This is the poll that we are mainly use as a reference. This is annual poll to talk about the perception on Japan and Korea to each other. And right now you can see that both Korea and Japan have negative perception on each other. But one lucky point here is that they perceive the Korea-Japan relation as an important fact. Even if they have negative perception on Korea, about more than 80% of Koreans are understanding the importance of the relation of that. And Negaku in Japan, they have the consensus on the um, foreign relation related perception. And from 2017, more Japanese say that they are not feeling familiar with Koreans, and the gap between feeling familiar with it and not familiar with it, the gap itself is widening. But one good point here is that as we shared the Koreans' perception on the importance of the relation itself, Japan, about 60% of the Japanese people in responding to this issue say that the relation itself is really important. So it is something that can be changed depending on the government's reaction and the policies toward each other. So this kind of perception between the two, we have to think about the possibility of the reconciliation. Anti-Korea is being used widely in Japan since 2015. Back then, there was a cartoon, Anti-Korea, which was a big hit in Japan. So right now, it is not only anti-Korea, it goes to shameful Korea and also dementia Korea and also destruction of Korea. So they are going and worsening and intensifying their wars, criticizing their relation with Korea. As the Professor Park also mentioned, this is the result of the unstable nationalism. And also after the Prime Minister Abe, there was turning to rightist movement, which was intensified. And also many people went out to the street to again to go against the right of the Korean Japanese living in Japan. But even so, one thing that we can see as an opportunity is the hybrid in culture between the two countries is getting stronger. In Japan, after the winter sonata, these days the crush on love is very famous. And in Korea, the Nintendo games are very popular. And also, when you go out to the street, so many Japanese restaurants are here in Korea. So the culture itself is something that each country perceive as part of their lives. So in Niigata Council, when I explain a little bit further, in Nagano Prefecture, you can see the highest number of population of Korea living there. It's because we have monument here, Matsushiro underground bunker. So in Matsushiro sacred bunker, it is estimated more than 10,000 walkers forced to go to Japan and work there. And there, back in 1995, we established the Memorial of Peace for Korean victims. But for the first time, as a council general, I was the first person to go there to participate in the anniversary for the Memorial of Peace for Korean victims. So before me, there was nobody as a council general to go there. So here you can see lots of media outlets came to broadcast my participation here, but none of the Korean broadcasters came to see this. But here, backside of this monument, you can see this one. Around 50 years after the war, many Koreans who were forced to work and forced to suffer harsh labor are commemorated. That is what it is written on the backside of the monument. And this is the article broadcasted by the NHK during the anniversary itself. And back then, the honorary president of the group to protect this monument said that on the very bottom of this monument reading, here, there's a name who made a concerted effort to erect this monument. There are three people. Back in 95, he was one of those people contributed to the erection of the monument. He made his remarks on that day. And also, when you see the plat. You see the platform and the panel just in front of the monument. Here you can see that more than 300 people were forced and suffered to work here, and there, because they try to hide some of the marks there, so they try to erase that part. They are forced and suffered to come here to do the labor and try to say that there are a lot of different ideas and the facts here. Nothing is confirmed. They try to hide this fact, but it was discovered and they can erase it later on. And next is the Yunbonggil, the martyr's burial site, and also the monument to commemorate his martyr action. But not many people are knowing about the fact that his burial site and his martyr monument are erected here. This monument was erected thanks to the support of the private sector. And every year on his martyr day, we made a commemoration ceremony. There, we erected this monument. It was all thanks to the Yamada mayor who made a full support for the erection of this monument. Even after that, even if the rightists in Japan went against this idea, but he permanently leased this place for protecting this monument. This kind of effort is not well provided and discovered to Koreans. If it is disclosed fully and widely used, then maybe we can have the possibility for reconciliation. Whenever I have a chance to do the speech in front of people, I close my remarks or lectures by using former President Kim Dae-jung's speech in the Japanese parliament. It is foolish to make the entire 1,500-year history of exchange and cooperation meaningless because of this unfortunate history. Thank you for your listening.
Thank you, Consul General Chang, for your remarks. Based on your experience working in Japan, you talked about issues between the two countries. Between the two countries, the perception toward each other has worsened, and especially Nagasaki Prefecture. There are monuments to remember the sacrificed Korean laborers, and also entire Yun has been paid respect. So at the government level between the two countries, there are aspects that they do not respect each other, but there's always a potential opportunity for the civil society to exchange their knowledge and wisdom together. Now, it's the time to meet with the speaker who are joining us online. Professor Asano Toyomi, are you with us online? Good afternoon.
Has just joined us. So I recommend the chairs to get Professor Ma to present her speech.
Okay, first I would like to thank the organizers' invitation.
It's a great honor for me to be here with everybody. The title of first, I would like to share my PowerPoint. The topic of my presentation is on war memory and historical reconciliation in a global context. The purpose of my talk today is about the war memory and historical reconciliation in East Asia. I would like to argue how war memory has contributed to the rise of nationalism in East Asia. Also, I would like to address the issue how war memory, here I would like to use the public memory, played a role in historical reconciliation in East Asia. Historically, when we talk about the war memory, we always think about the history issues. But however, how to think of the public memory, the role of public memory in reconciliation? So we need to think about what kind of war memory is related to this issue. So here, I would like to argue historic understanding is a kind of public memory which has a very big role, has played a very big role in historical learning. Also, it has played a very big role in historical reconciliations. Here, I would like to give you a very easy to understand example how War Museum has played in the historic understanding in East Asia. Because memory played a very big role in forgetting and remembering, here, how the politics of museum played a role in nation building. For example, how museum has played a role in forgetting and remembering the war. So why the memory war started in East Asia? For example, between Japan and China. So here, I would like to use this tour, museum, as a tour for historical reconciliation. When we talk about historical reconciliation in between China and Japan, first, I would like to mention about the state-to-state level reconciliations. Before 1980s, to some extent, from the state-to-state level, historical reconciliations were, to some extent, reached a very successful level. Why? Because in 1972, when Japan and China established a diplomatic normalization, the war issue was settled. At that time, both the government disagreed the war responsibility. Chinese think only a group of militarists should be responsible for the war responsibility. Then a few years later, the two countries reached a new agreement, signed a treaty, which is peace treaty between the two countries. From the perspective of Japan, Japan decided to support Chinese economic development. So in this case, from the state-to-state level, the reconciliation was reached, to some extent quite successful. So during this period, from the society to society level, the peoples of two countries also reached a consensus. In China, there are very big Japanese favor for the pop culture. This trend continued until the mid-1980s. Why? Because the history issue erupted immediately in the middle 1980s. The beginning of the textbook, the next is Yasukuni. So these two issues came to a very big issue, came to the political agendas in two countries, makes the historical reconciliations became more and more difficult. So during this period, there's a very big phenomenon occurred in China for the memory war. That is the National Museum of World War II, to commemorate World War II, were established. For example, there's a very big museum was established in Nanjing to commemorate Nanking massacre victims. Also, another one in Harbin was built to commemorate the victims of Chinese suffering of Japanese Unit 731 armies. So that's the product of textbook controversy, also Chinese struggle over the history issues. So this kind of building, this kind of war memory issues came to Chinese political agenda in the later 2 decades until today. So how to build a Chinese national victimhood, also to build a new Chinese identity emerged in Chinese political agenda. That is the memorial of Nanking massacre victims. Now it becomes the National Memorial Day for commemorating the massacre victims during Japanese aggression. So in 2015, the government even established a very special national ceremony. That means to commemorate the Nanking massacre victims from the national levels. Also, Chinese try to tell the world about the Chinese suffering. On the other hand, this gap became much, much bigger between China and Japan. Then how Japanese memorize the war? Japanese war memory can be, as many historians, many political scientists argued, it's the memory of Japanese victimhood. Or almost over 90, about 100 Japanese memory of the war is the hardship because of the atomic bombings, because of the hardship of the war, because of the shortage of food. But anyway, victimhood of Japanese memory began to be the dominant memory in the post-war societies. So if you go to visit the Japanese museum, Japanese memorial service, you will find many, many war-related monuments. So here, how Japanese commemorate the victims of World War II. If you go to the National Museum, there is no war. If you go to the Peace Museum, it will talk about Japanese sufferings during the World War II. American bombings of Japanese cities. If you go to the War Museum, for example, the War Museum in Yasukuni, Yushuka Museum, you will find how Japan justified or to some extent beautified Japan's war. So this kind of phenomena can be found easily in Japanese post-war memory. As I just said, peace museums, most of the peace museums in Japan commemorate the Japanese victims during the American bombing of Japanese cities. The most typical two museums are the Hiroshima Atomic Bomb Museum and another one, Nagasaki Atomic Bomb Museums. These two museums were established in 1955 after American occupation completed. So, but however, in 1990s, the war memories became, or also how to say, had a very turning point, both in China and Japan. Why? Because the geopolitics, because of the end of the Cold War, because of the comfort of women issue, because of history dispute emerged again. Also, during this period, war responsibility became a very big political issues. Also, it came to Japanese and Chinese political agendas. During this area, you will find the Murayama talks about the Japanese, Japanese government acknowledge Japan's war responsibility to cause the suffering to the Asian countries. During this area, there is a very big memory boom, both in Japan and China. Then there is a very big boom emerged in China and Japan to build war museums. So once again, war responsibility came to Japanese political agenda. So how to reform history became a very big, also very critical issues during these areas. History reform movement, or a new kind of revisionism, history and revisionism, contribute to Japanese the rise of Japanese nationalism. So the very big argument is about how to delay those negative image in Japanese textbooks. For example, how to write the Nanking massacre incident. How to memorize this kind of issues became to be a very big, also a very serious topic for revisionists. So during this area, there are also a very big reform in museum. For example, if you go to the museum in Yasukuni Shrine, you will find the refurbishment of the new museum. Then the aim of this new museum is to tell the truth of modern history. What's the truth of modern history? That means it will create a new national myth. That means the past glory of Japanese empire. So if you go to visit the museum, you will find that they even use the term Greater East Asia War to refine the Asia-Pacific War. This judge is an Indian judge in the Tokyo Tribune. So they even built a monument to commemorate Indian judge who justified Japan's war. Then say Japan is no guilty. To justify Japan's war, Japan used Indian judge's remark to make an announcement that Japan's war aim is to liberate East Asia. So during this period, there was a very big history dispute, also history war between Japan and China. China criticized Japanese textbook, Yasukuni, also asked for more apology. On the other hand, from Japan's perspective, war issue, responsibility, Yasukuni visit, China threat came into Japan's political agenda. So there's a very big fight with a memory war occurred between the two countries. What's the result? What's the outcome of this history dispute? The most important thing is the memory war contribute to the increase of mutual distrust between the two countries, between the peoples of the two countries. So this is a pure research standard survey. Most of Chinese, over 77% of Chinese response stated that Japan haven't apologized enough to the Chinese people. So, on the other hand, the rising animosity emerged in Japanese society. Today, over 80% of Japanese respondents said they had a very unfavorable image toward Chinese people. So the outcome is because of the history dispute, because of the history war, because of the memory war. This kind of rising animosity has increased dramatically in last 3 decades. So history issue is not only a history issue, it becomes a serious issue deeply relating to the regional security and cast a very dark shadow on the regional security. For example, when we think about the regional security, most of Japanese, majority of Japanese and Chinese believe that each side is a very serious threat to each other. That means history issue is not only about history, it's also deeply related, also deeply connected to the reality. So what's the reality? When we go back to the history, when we think about the war memory, so here, it's not a finished project, but anyway, I would like to argue how to think about history, historical reconciliation in East Asia. First, let's go back to the history. So what is history? History is not only talking about history, it's also a way to help us to think about the present. So in this case, how to teach history, how to teach war becomes a very, very critical issues for the education in East Asia. So can the people in East Asia share memory to reach the concepts, to find some common understanding to solve this issue? Not just for history, for building a new regional peace. So can the people in East Asia find some common ground to solve this issue? So that becomes a very big issue for the people in East Asian countries. From a very big, or we say from a global context, history issue also related to the historical reconciliations. If the historical reconciliation is not completed, can we build a new regional security? Can we build a new peaceful order in East Asia? That will be a very big challenge for people to think about. So in this case, how to think of history, how to teach history becomes a very big challenge for historians to think in the global area. Thank you very much. I look forward to your comments and suggestions and comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Ma, for your presentation. You talked about how the War Memorial Museum plays its role in history and history reconciliation. And you touched upon the differences in the position between the two countries toward war. Yes, I think we are not given enough time after attending 4 presentations. I think we only have 20 minutes until the end of the session. We first need to listen to the opinions from the 2 designated discussants, and I would like to open up the floor to you. And then we might invite the 4 presenters to add more comments. So first discussant is Professor Asano, Toyomi.
Share my screen. Yes, thank you so much for giving me a great chance to comment for presentations. I have learned a lot. So I want to show you some key points to get these presentations to be established. Professor Park's presentation is about the historical origin and dynamics of contemporary nationalism in East Asia. And Professor Lee's presentation is about the politics between Japan, China and the United States, and also how South Korea and China relations should be addressed from history. And yeah, Professor Chong is a transnational civilian network between two countries. Professor Ma is a reconciliation, how it should be. And the first point I want to propose is that something missed in the, maybe we should understand the power politics, not only the logics of national interest and powers, as is often mentioned in the power politics relations, such as China and the US relations, or Korean national interest or Japanese national interests, or so. Maybe something missed in the logics of the argument of power politics is nation itself is being built in modern times, and the nations has some possibility to be transformed in near future, because not nation itself in East Asia has been quickly formed in the modern times, as Professor Park mentioned, in the process of great power games in 19th century or 20th century in imperial era. So great power relations has give birth to the nation systems in nation states in East Asia. In this process, Japanese imperial rule over Korea or over Taiwan existed. But we are still in the process of transformations. Can we regard in this way? So quickly formed national consciousness or national identity is still open to be transformed somehow mutually, and in the process of dialogue, I want to believe so. Professor Ma's presentation is open to the possibility of the transformation of nations. The second point I want to argue is how can we make national emotions to be a target of internationally joint research? If we can be free to discuss each national emotions partly separated from the generally shared national emotions in each countries, maybe we can build up somehow shared identity in East Asia. But by doing so, I guess focusing upon public memory, as Professor Ma Xiaohua did, it's a influential methodology, and maybe we should argue the function of the nationalism in contemporary world, as Professor Park argued, and how education and exhibition of museums is forming national identities, and how domestic politics legitimacy is supplied by following the national discourses or national discourses shared by national peoples and supported by shared memories and shared values. The third point I want to argue is conflicting values which support selected memories. As Professor John mentioned, pinpointing the Ishikawa Prefecture's cases where Ishikawa Prefecture's civilians or mayors support Korean independence movement heroes. The memories of Korean independence movement is supported by the universal values of human dignity or freedom. On the other hand, Japanese memory, victim-centered Japanese memory, is supported by the values of development and social welfare. It's my argument, and in that way, the memory is selected memories. So it's not a war past as a war, but selected memories. So how memories are being selected, it is related with the function of the values. Japanese want to chase for welfare and development. On the other hand, Korean want to chase for human rights and dignity and freedom. In this way, the memories are being selected. In that way, we can argue the historical memories and national emotions in this way. The fourth point I want to argue is domestic conflicts in each country. Not only Japan and Korea, but in Taiwan or in China, I guess two conflicting values are bearing the domestic conflicts. Japanese right wings likes the values of welfare or development, but Korean's democratic parties hate these values because welfare and development had been utilized by the authoritarian regimes of Park Chung-hee in 1970s, which suppressed the human rights or human freedom. In Japan, in Japanese civil society, there are very few civilian movements who are making much more the freedom and human rights. But in Japanese society, those who advocated the freedom or human rights cannot win, cannot take leadership over the conservatives who want to advocate development or social welfare. Vice versa, in Korean society, the Moon Jae-in regimes is making much of freedom and human dignity and women's dignity. It is related to the democratization of Korean society. And those who advocated to social welfare or development are united with former Hannara conservative parties, and now it's called conservative parties. In that way, Koreans left are inclined to be united with Japanese left, but the Japanese left is minority. But the Japanese right is like to have a link with Koreans right, but they like the same value of conservative or development or social welfare. But the fifth point I want to argue is a dissonance between domestic politics and international politics. As I mentioned, in the linkage of domestic politics, the legitimacy is very important. And when we consider the memories and shared values. But this shared values is intertwined with soft power in international politics, as UNESCO's legacies cases shows. What kind of memories should be elevated as universal legacies in the world? It is strongly argued between two countries, and in this way, power politics have never been cut off from the memory or emotional issues with nationalism. But by viewing the structure of domestic politics and international politics in this way, we can detach ourselves as a researcher from our own nationally internalized emotions. So maybe it's important things for as a researcher to do is to detach ourselves from our own national emotions. I'm now leading the reconciliation studies project in Waseda University. Professor Ma is one of the strong members, and we are organizing the reconciliation studies, which is intertwined with conflict resolution studies. But nationalism studies is also intertwined with these studies, and not only governmental relation, but also civilians movement, and also intellectual scholars or historians' functions, and also mass culture or media's functions is argued by several teams of our reconciliation studies groups. So I'm very honored to be invited here, and I hope today is a starting point for us to argue national emotion or nationalism itself, how it has been formed in the process of history, and what kind of future is still open for us. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Asano Toyomi, for your discussion. You asked a few questions to presenters, and toward the end, you also mentioned about the research that you're conducting with the group, and maybe we can you are going to conduct a research about the national sentiment in the future in your research. And the last discussant is Hyun-soo Kim, Senior Research Fellow from NAHF. I'm so sorry to say this, but we are running out of our time. I can only give you 8 minutes, so please be concise. Due to our time constraint, I think it would be difficult for us to have answers from our presenters. I have a question for Park and also a Lee professor, two professors. So please read it, and later on, please let me know. And I would like to simplify my question to Professor Park. You said the three countries are very much focused on nationalism, and also between China, Japan, and Korea, nationalism between the three countries are rather a bit different to one another. And especially in the case of China, I think it's not about a nationalism, but it's more like a statelism, for example. And for Japan and Korea, I think it is difficult for us to share how we recognize each other because we have different positions and different stances. And I want you to further elaborate on that. And one another thing is that nationalism between the two countries, we criticize a lot, but when we put it in different direction, nationalism-centric sentiment is very strong, even in Korea. In this situation, when we started independent movement, nationalism became an engine for us to push ahead, which played a very positive role in our history. But today, that becomes a stumbling block for reconciliation in history. So how can we overcome weaknesses in nationalism in Korea? That is my question. And Professor Lee, you talked about the conflict in history between the U.S. and China. I learned a lot from both the presentations delivered by Professor Park and Professor Lee. And as our topic is historical reconciliation and sustainable relations of peace in Northeast Asia, I recalibrated my question according to that. China is conducting North-East project which is overarching issue from ancient times to the modern times, and it is even expanding to the modern society. So Northeast project that people talked in the past and people talk in the present are different to each other. And many people say that the conflicting issues between Korea and China boils down to Northeast project. I think China has been very assertive, and China put too much focus, and China has been too much China-centered when they talk about history. And these days, I think their education to instill nationalism is being very effective. among young people we call 샤오퍼능, and the two elements come together. I think Northeast project by China is going beyond the realm of academia, even to young generation, which is very concerning. So in your perspective, what do you think China's stance or position is? Why China is playing that way? And can you predict to what level China wants to take this problem to? So your opinion will be appreciated in researching about this issue. And also to the Consular General Chung, I have a question to you. I meet a lot of people from civil society which conduct their activities in Japan, and maybe their size has been reduced, or maybe I don't know the number of members of civil society increased. I want to know about that. And civil society members are quite old, or they do have members of housewives or students. I would rather categorize them as the weak side of the people or marginalized. So I always appreciated their activity, but when we put their activity in broader context in Japan, we need to think about how effective their role is and how big their influence is. Civil society in Japan is much better than that in China, and I think it's not a question but rather a comment for Professor Ma. What concerns me is related to what you said. For example, War Memorial Museum and education. Through that, how we are going to remember war. And I also agree with your thoughts. I went to the Hiroshima Peace Museum, and when I first entered the museum, I didn't think it this way, but as I came out of the museum, I came to think that, oh, okay, Japanese could probably be victims of the war. And also the same can be said of the War Museum in China. When I first entered the space, I did not think what they want me to think. But when I came out, I also thought that, wow, China is a great country, and which made me think that the three countries are having difficult times. And in the realm of the academia, scholars from the three countries need to come together and need to shrink the problem. And that's why we conducted the joint research. In the process, I think the history distortion problems have started to spread among the general public. So we thought that maybe the scholars from the three countries need to come together and provide a joint education. That's why we made efforts to publish a future-oriented textbook. Of course, that's not been completed, but that such thing exists between the Korea and Japan. And to students or the general public, I think a visual message delivered by, for example, War Museum, it seems it is stronger than anything before. So that means I think people from the three countries need to maybe come together, do something that's relevant to, for example, war museums or educational museums. So nationalism, which is prevalent among the three countries, is a big issue, and we need to think about how we can overcome the issue. So about the questions that I laid out to you, you can give your answers later on. Thank you so much.
그 연구위원
Thank you very much, researcher Kim. I asked the host to have at least 5 minutes, but it is impossible because we have next session. as we have fruitful discussions now, but it is so sad for me to close this session. But one thing that I want to propose today is based on and making this as an opportunity, maybe next year's Jeju Forum or other academic conference or other forms of gathering should be made to further discuss the discussion points that we have discovered today as presented by the Professor Ma or a researcher Asano Toyomi, so that we can discuss these issues further, and then our institute can publish this as a collection of all the publications and idea inside. And the people here, I know that everybody has their own idea they want to share, but I want to give apology for not giving you enough time to express your opinion. But I surely believe that we will have another venues to talk further about the issues that we discussed today. I hope we can have another opportunity soon enough. The reconciliation of Northeast Asia is really important. Today, the discussants and the presenters proposed different ideas on this. I'd like to have more discussion, but due to the time limitation, we have to close today's session now. But what is more important is what to do next. That's something that we need to focus on later on. For the past 80 minutes, I'd like to express my deepest gratitude for all the discussants and the panelists for your concerted effort. Thank you very much. This brings us to an end of the main sessions for today. Please give a warm round of applause for the panelists and discussants. And now we will have break time for about 30 minutes, then we'll go on next sessions. Thank you very much for your participation.